Hey, everybody. It is a pleasure and honor to be here sharing with you my experience. I'm Andreas Addison. I am a lifelong innovator of government and supporter of all the things that startups can do to change our cities from the inside out. Most importantly, try to make sure we understand exactly what it takes to kind of innovate in a city and working with their local governments. Um, as my career has gone through many iterations, but most notably, I was working in City Hall for 8 years and then became an elected official. And this is now my second term on City Council. And so I've helped navigate this startup scene of creating cities as clients, working whether it be internally to City Hall when I was a civic innovator, trying to help create the contracts, work on pilots, et cetera, to now as an elected official, trying to find ways in which to highlight the opportunities that working with startups can do to elevate the solutions we need to solve for problems all across our city, from things that can go from traffic, parking to concerns to even social issues. So with that, it's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to our conversation as we go through this. Simple agenda. I've got my introduction, which I'm in the middle of doing now. I'll give you a little bit more background and experience on why I'm speaking to you. And I'll kind of jump into why selling to cities, some best practices, lessons learned, some stories about what I've worked on, understanding the differences between a mayor, elected official, and some of the executives. And then I'll kind of finish with a little understanding of some of the nuanced pieces and terms that it takes to navigate through procurement. So as I kind of said, I worked in City Hall for a long time. 8 years is a long time for me, considering I'm not that old. But with that, I worked in City Hall for 8 years. I worked with a call center implementation. I worked on updating our customer relationship management software. I worked with C-Click Fix and Nextdoor and other civic technology apps. So that's where I learned a lot about open data and all the value and importance of really how really lean startup technology can really elevate connections with the constituents, creating accountability and transparency of government, and things that I feel like really elevate the conversation of what city governments can do. I've also led innovation projects with IBM Smarter Cities Challenge. That was in 2013. Project focused on how do we attract private investment without causing gentrification, which is displacing of Richmond residents in their neighborhoods, while also supporting the needs of growing that economy. So affordable housing, working on sidewalks and other traffic improvements, et cetera, to make it more walkable and attractive for investment. Did a Fuse Core Fellowship, that is led a fellow for a year working on projects to improve social services and their accessibility for our residents that are living in poverty. In Richmond, we have about 26% of our population lives in poverty. That's about 54,000 people at any given moment. Most of those are unfortunately children, which is why this is such an important priority for me, which led me into my Code for America project in 2015, where we focused on the accessibility of healthcare for those who are uninsured. Even with our healthcare act, we still have people that are uninsured or not accessing and utilizing the free healthcare services they have available to them. So there's still a lot going on in that capacity, but this is a little bit of my work in city government as a whole. From that point on, I started my own consulting, civic innovator. I've done a lot of strategy work, worked with some civic technology solutions. I'm design thinking certified, so I do a lot of design thinking and human-centered design training, whether it be for a meeting, product, service, or other type of need as a whole. And I've mentored several startups over the past couple years. And this experience has led me to be an adjunct professor at the University of Virginia and at the University of Richmond. And I'll entering into, I think, what would be called my fifth semester. So my second year teaching. I teach social enterprise, an elective I've created called Equity by Design. I'll be teaching that for the first time this fall at UVA. That's really diving into the needs of transformative entrepreneurship and how to really address the needs of our communities. My experience has led me to work with cities like Athens, Greece, Warsaw, Poland, and the EU. Two of those I worked on with Michael Lake himself. So that's how we are connected and part of the reason why I'm here speaking with you today. So let's get into our topic, selling to cities. And I called this the art of the deal, mostly because it's all about how you pitch and present what you're trying to do. So no matter what your startup might be, you have an inspiration, whether you saw an opportunity to improve something or a way to leverage technology or create data and information or even analytics. A lot of AI and VR stuff is being used prominently today. A lot of that necessarily are keywords that get attention but when it comes to adoption by a city, can sometimes create a little bit of confusion. So one of the key parts with you is, we want to make sure you understand what you see as a return on investment, what we call ROI. We want to make sure that it translates into a city government function, because sometimes the business ROI isn't always necessarily how a government official is going to see the same value. And so what we want to make sure you focus on is you've got a really good idea. That's why you're here. You've got a really good, I think, solution you want to bring to the fold. You want to learn how you can really create the change and momentum. So through that, how does a city partner with you to leverage what you've built? Some of the benefits you want to focus on is how it's easy to implement, easy to manage. It's not going to create a more staff time or resources. Maybe even offer things about training or leveraging that this is an opportunity for you and your company, your startup, to learn the change needed to help make this an easier adoptable solution for other cities and themselves as well. So through that, when you bring a smart city technology solution to a government platform or government agency as a whole, make sure you don't use too many big words. Sometimes a platform might not be something that they're familiar with, or the software as a service solution might not be something they're open to. They might have some ingrained back office solutions that they're really kind of committed to, and your solution might come in the face of challenging them. Which is why I think using terms like a pilot and testing to also prove that your solution works. And if you can show it as a way that can minimize the needs and resources from the city themselves to use your tool, your technology, makes it easier for them to want to work with you. One of the things that comes into that too is a lot of times people see working with a startup, maybe an unproven or maybe a lack of enough background of experience that they can see working with you in this capacity is risky. Right. And a lot of times it's dependent on this person, right? This director, this person working within a department itself. That's the person you need to be working with you every day. A lot of times these projects, these pilots fall from a direct executive down to a, mid-level director to a lower level person that's really running the day-to-day operation. The last thing this person needs is being told something new to add to their operation that's going to take up hours per week when they're already overtaxed as it is. And so one of the key parts is, and I've heard this used good and bad, is, well, the mayor wants this to happen. The elected official wants this to happen. Or the person who is running the show wants this to happen. Because then it seems forced. This needs to be seen as a kind of a welcoming opportunity to achieve the goals that you're trying to show. So your return on investment for an elected official might be the key buzzword, right? It's the thing that makes it work. It's the smart city technology. It's the virtual reality. It's the algorithm that solves this problem. But when it comes down to the person doing the day-to-day work, you got to really focus on that ROI, that return on investment for them is how easy is this for them to use? Is this going to work with the systems they already have in place? Am I going to spend a lot of time training my staff to work with you to get done what you've committed to doing with my bosses to get done? This is something key. And I think a lot of times the ambition and ideal of trying to sell your product and solution to a government can sometimes get lost, because by the time this ideal reaches the important person, the true partner that you'll be working with, the return on investment that you've sold it on is kind of lost, because what really matters is making sure you understand what it's going to take for you to implement with that solution itself. So let me give you an example of this. OpenGov is a platform. This is probably in the early days, probably the first couple of years of their operation. They were in advanced negotiation with our city leadership in Richmond, Virginia. They had staff support from the budget and finance office. At the time, before we used OpenGov, I think we had 3 or 4 different technology solutions helping support our finance operations and budget, and also how they talked to each other and did reporting. And so we had this kind of really confusing operation. And what happened was this solution came as a way to do streamlined budgeting, to create a finance process on top of our budget that could alert them on any overexpending or underexpending, et cetera. But here's what happened. All the cool things about how it works, how it would succeed, were bought in. The directors got it. But when it came down to IT, the IT department, the technology staff, they saw the conflict of, we've got existing contracts, we've got staff aligned to support these systems, and now you're going to come in with a new system to try to change all that. They saw this as not a win. They saw this as more work. And so what happened was it got stuck in negotiation, which is all the details with legal, procurement, and city leadership. So what OpenGov was pitching as the ROI for the platform, um, when it got down to the people that were going to be signing the contract with their budget, the director of IT, he said, it's not worth it for me. The savings you're saying this is going to create aren't going to be real because I see other expenses. And so what we had was this kind of mixed bag of great solution addressing a key need, being stuck in the legal details. And so one of the things that came in was, oh, I skipped too soon. One of the things we did as a solution was, what is your savings? And what was the argument that I brought into it said, you're not going to be able to hire the staff that this platform can do for you for free, included in its software, where your transition of those contracts is actually going to create the savings needed to make this work. Meaning that in the long run, you're actually going to save money by spending money on this platform because you're going to be getting rid of 3 contracts with existing vendors that ends in the next year or is up for renewal. And in that, the staff that you would need to hire would be between 4 and 6 people. And 4 and 6 people in the marketplace of the level of skill you need was more than you'd pay per year for this platform. And so when it came down to it, the selling point had nothing to do with the solution itself. All it had to do with was staff, new staff, and existing resources, things you will never probably find out as why you might stall in a negotiation. Meaning that sometimes the political will of elected leadership doesn't meet the actual solution solving contract, pen to paper work you need to do the work you need to do. So that's just a level of advice for you is sometimes you don't always have me on the other side of the negotiation table advocating for what the work you're going to do. And it's key for you to be aware of those challenges because what might happen is that your ROI versus the director or the direct person you're going to work with's ROI might not match. So let's talk about how do you pilot your tech? So before you even get to the place of getting stuck in procurement or legal, let's look it back a little bit further. How do you create a good pilot for your solution, your startup technology? So first of all, let's start with success. If you successfully implement this technology, what do you intend to prove? On both ends, your success of your platform working and the ultimate outcome for the community that you're serving. And so make sure you identify success for both parties because a lot of times your success and the city's success might not be directly the same, but you need both in order to work together in order for you to go to the next step with your pilot, which potentially could be a really lucrative contract. And so with this, one of the things we need to keep in mind is make sure you define the roles you need. How many meetings are you going to need? What kind of data? How much integration are you going to need with existing platforms? How frequently you're going to be checking up on those things? Because that is going to relate to time for the person that you're going to be working with. And that's really important from the beginning. Again, set realistic expectations and timelines. Don't be too ambitious trying to make it done too quickly. The last thing you want to do is find out that in month 3 of your 3-month pilot, you needed 6 months because it took so long to get the details worked through that department that you weren't able to truly operate in that time frame. So the last thing you want to do is short sell yourself and not have the time you need to truly prove that, because what you might find when you get into that government operations and is that what you thought was there was an easy plug-in might not be as easy as you thought, or in the way might be some hurdle that you did not expect. So make sure you put a realistic timeline and allow for that timeline to give you a little wiggle room so that you can be successful, because what you're looking for here is a partner, a relationship to build upon what you think is going to be a big solution. Don't oversell. A lot of times this is a way for you to test your product, and it's a free test. This is not a transaction. A lot of times there's hey, we'll do a free pilot for 6 months, and then it's a really expensive tool at the end. And you're like, well, I don't have that money in the budget. So sometimes make sure what you're providing for this government as a solution isn't necessarily going to become a really expensive and cost for them and when you're done. Because sometimes they want to make sure that they understand what they're investing in your solution as well as what you're going to be investing for the long term. Another key thing too is target different size cities. This is one thing I've always found is always interesting is a lot of startup technologies, of course, go after the big governments. Why? Well, they're big and there's probably a good way for you to test out your solution, maybe fall into some big department's budget and be able to find a way to get funded or work through the process itself. But one of the things I found, and this goes to a story of John Tolva, who's a former chief technology officer of Chicago about 7 years ago, is, we had a conversation about this exact issue where he said, Chicago is a big city. There's a lot of things we can test, a lot of things we can take a little risk on, but there are a lot of things we can't. because how big they are, where it would cost so much to test and pilot something to adequately show it works that they just don't have the time or are not willing to spend the money or the resources to see if that's going to be a solution. Enter in your middle-sized cities, your cities that are between maybe 200 and 500,000 people. Those cities actually have a lot of the same problems that larger cities have, but they're more isolated. They're maybe a little bit more geographic, centralized, or other places where you might see a bigger benefit. So what you see is that you can find opportunities all across your city portfolio and maybe find ways in which you can target specific areas of need and priorities to really test your solution in a really confined area, because a lot of times having it be either geographically isolated or a specific time of year need or whatever might be a way for you to really kind of put some guardrails or limits on exactly what you're testing helps the city see it's worth this time. I can partner in that. Another key part is make sure that when you start your project with your pilot, that you're building upon your case study and white paper to prove that what you're doing works. Prove that your success is being achieved, identify the obstacles and hurdles you needed to identify, and more importantly, in that white paper, if you can, show what you did to solve those. There's nothing better than seeing how you learned something that another government did not know was a problem before they go do what your solution is going to do. Lastly, be ready to compete once your pilot's completed. A lot of legal requirements require that they put this out to bid or put a competitive bid out. It's not meant to be that you're not a good partner. It's just some legal requirements for doing that. So you've got the leg up. You've already been working in there. They're comfortable with you. They see the success of your platform. You can show them your scalability or your other aspects of being successful, and that really helps move forward. Another key thing too is take a look at some other technology RFPs or requests for proposals. More importantly, the final contracts that they've selected from other cities, because in there are going to be some valuable requirements of what you might want to make sure that you're prepared for in maybe helping them prepare for what they need to put out to bid. What could be better for at the end of your pilot program, you get to hand over to that city government and say, here's your requirement language for your RFP, your request for proposals that I know you have to do, and we're willing to compete for that work. But I want to make sure that you're prepared for what these requirements of the work we did to make sure that they're going to be doing it. Because the last thing you want to have is someone like on the other side of that table making up what the requirements of your work was. So work with them, develop that with them, tell them at the end and work on that with them. That's a key value add that I feel like a lot of startups miss is let me help you with what I know is going to be the next step, which potentially could be competing for your longer term work. But in that longer term work is where you make your money. Another key thing, register your company or find a partner, because one of the things I find is that you've got to register your company with the GSA, with the federal government. You might need to sign up with the IRS, get an EIN number so you're federally registered in the United States. You also might need to find ways to get some vendor approval depending on what type of consulting work or other part of solutions you're trying to create. So do some research, find some comparative businesses and see how they're set up in the registry of the federal government itself. Being registered in that line puts you in a place to compete. So when you're already in the General Services Administration, the GSA, you're going to be listed as a vendor in there. And so with that, when you go try to compete for national work or with states or local governments, you have an opportunity for them to see the work you do. Now, have some costing in there too, have some pricing. It's okay. You can always negotiate the price. Trust me, there's always a great way to know that. But that's a key asset for you to understand how that looks to be. Trying to do that can be time consuming. So be prepared to spend some time filling out some forms, submitting things online, et cetera. But opening a business in America, and especially in Virginia and Richmond, I've done it myself twice now. It's not that hard, but it does help set up for the success in the future. Another thing too, it might be easier sometimes to partner with an existing business, maybe a business that is one you're familiar with, one you worked with, maybe didn't partner with before, that might already have navigated through all these things together already. Sometimes there's an example. I have Socrata, which is now owned by Tyler Technologies, but at the time, Socrata was a self-standing company. They were the open data portal that we used. They had a GSA contract. It was a piggyback off of a company called Alamo LLC that sold engineering design work. But because technically open data was a engineered system for IT data storage, that's how they got classified. But what happened was I was able to use that contract language and get the contract signed through procurement relatively quickly. Another thing to look at would be SWAM, small women-owned and minority-owned businesses. A lot of those are preferred and will get preferential treatment. Sometimes it fast tracks you through certain procurement requirements. So just want to make sure you're aware that these are some of the things that are really important to be navigating as a business to be prepared for when you want to compete and when you want to work with doing a pilot. Trust me, everybody's going to look for these exact issues. Are you on the GSA contract? Are you registered with my state? Do you have a presence with the IRS EIN number? Are you registered as maybe a SWAM business itself? If you can check off as many of those boxes as possible, you're going to be seen as a very legitimate partner, and they're going to get rid of those potential risks coming into wanting to work with you. All right, let's talk about people like me, mayors and elected officials. We go to conferences. We go to a lot of events throughout the year. Talk to us, find us, go through the list and see who might be a city or someone representing a city that you want to work with. Use some of the big buzz, shiny words we want to hear, right? Tell us the things that make us want to like pique interest or set up a meeting to discuss further. One of the things that's going to be key though is navigating the attention of an elected official versus someone in city leadership is two different pieces. A mayor and elected officials like myself, we want to see big wins. We want to see something that we can deliver on implementing in our city. When it comes time to finding maybe a mayor versus a city council person, maybe a county manager or some other person of that level, that's who those are. But then you get to people with directors, supervisors or managers, and they'll go to the same conferences. The key things that could be different is talk about how you've worked through, integrating with existing systems. Talk about how you've got an API that's, going to work with any system you have in place, or you will find a way to achieve that goal for them. Explain how you're going to not need a lot of resources on their end and how you're going to take on the ongoing costs of maintenance and upkeep costs are low to keep this thing going, and explain how if there is customization needed that, you're ready to, put in the work to make that happen. And one of the things too is there's always going to become, when customization is required, there's always going to be a little bit of a fight because someone's going to say, well, I control it on the IT side in the city. And you're going to say, that's fine, but I need it to do this way. And you're going to be stuck going back and forth and never really getting that to work that way. So what you need to do is make sure that as you communicate to different groups of elected officials versus city leadership, you use the right language, you use the right words. Trust me, people that are mayors and elected officials, we really don't want to hear words about APIs and integration across platforms and security and all the other stuff. We just want to make sure that we understand what it does and how it can work. But make sure you know who you're talking to, so you're not going to be lost in pitching the wrong outcome of your solution to the wrong audience. Lastly, prove that you can hang with usual tech partners. A lot of you probably already have some mentors, some advisors, maybe a board and some membership that can show that kind of support. Leverage that. Say, hey, I've got staff that have worked with these big tech companies. Trust me. I know you're probably concerned about working with a startup, but we came from a big company because we couldn't do good change and work in that organization. So we created our own because we're that committed to making sure this works. That's something we want to hear. So make sure we know that you're committed to doing that work as a whole. All right. So let's talk about the fun stuff. And by fun, I mean not fun, procurement. So a lot of times with working with startups, whether it be a pilot or an actual technology contract, a lot of the work comes down to understanding the data. From my interactions with a lot of lawyers and procurement staff, a lot of times when we work with a startup technology solution, it's what access to data do you need of mine? What data are you creating? And where does it go? Where is it stored? And how do I make sure I can get it back if I need to? A lot of times that negotiation will kill a deal, will kill a contract without a doubt. A lot of times open data becomes this confusing word because technically, if you can FOIA, which is a Freedom of Information Act request, which is a legally defined process that says, as a public citizen, I can request information. And if it is legally accessible, then it technically cannot be restricted from accessing or being shared. Meaning that if you need the same data to use for your platform, and you can define that the data you need is labeled as open data, which is usually done by either a federal mandate, state mandate, or local government mandate. And if the data that you need is already labeled as public, then there should be no issue with what happens with the data from there. But there's still going to be concerns on chain of custody. If you do anything to alter the data that we create to make your own value or your own asset, We want to make sure it's not harmless, it's not harmful to somebody or going to be able to be used to target an individual people or individual person directly. A lot of the data we have is intentionally made anonymous or anonymized so that there is no conflict in making sure that's done. We are very protective because the last thing the city government wants is that we get data into the hands of a third-party vendor for a pilot or for a contract, and that was then leaked or was used to isolate and identify specific individuals. That is something very careful and very aware of a lot of leaders right now. And so just make sure you're able to understand how you're not going to be able to do that. Even if you might not yourself do that, the key thing is once it leaves our chain of custody, our control, we give it to somebody else. If they don't have the same security standards or expectations, then we are on the hook as well because we let you have that. So security of data is going to be very important, and making sure that we keep those standards up. FISMA is a federal guideline. It's a federal website. You can find information around those standards. I'm sure you're probably aware of those already, and that's something that's always important as well. Last thing too is, I think, what's in it for me, the WIFM. And I think the WIFM is something interesting. I hear this all the time when I was working with IT and other contracts, which was, yeah, I see what this does, but like, why do I need to work with this startup company? Like, why am I spending time in this initiative? Or why is this something that I need to work on with using my resources? And I think that's something key because a lot of times, if you want someone to fight through a procurement contract, navigating with city attorneys, fighting through the process of getting this approved, they need to know that what's worth fighting for. And that goes back to a couple points in the slides of your pilot. Your pilot has to explain why this is worth navigating through this process, because navigating through a contract with procurement is the last thing anybody wants to do, especially when it's something that might be seen as, this is not that impactful, this is going to take too long to approve, or this is not going to be worth it for me. You need to make sure you've identified all those pieces so that when they reach these hurdles, these barriers potentially, they're able to jump over them and make them work for you, because that's going to be really important. Lastly, this is something that's always interesting to me. I've heard this from several directors and leaders in city government. Why am I going to help this startup company make money? And it's a fascinating thought point, because what they're really saying is, why is it worth my time helping work with this little company that hasn't really proven enough to me to see that this is viable or going to work yet? I've got big tech companies selling me this stuff all the time. I tell them no. Why am I going to work with you? You're going to use my experience, and then you're going to go sell it to 25 other cities and make a couple $1 million, and I'm going to get nothing for it. Fair, but isn't that kind of the point? Every single local small business that opens up in your city, your neighborhood, your community, you go try them out, you help them out, you maybe go buy their coffee or their ware or their product or solution. You go in the door, you check it out, you see if it's worth going to it again. Same relationship here. You're trying to create an opportunity of change. Maybe if the bigger tech companies were actually effective at doing what you're trying to commit to doing with them, they wouldn't be in the situation we're in. And a lot of times, that's exactly why they need to be helping you. Because what happens is you're really helping the city. You need to be able to explain how you're helping the city achieve and overcome a goal, and that overcoming these hurdles is what's worth it for them. So let me tell you a story about SeeClickFix. So SeeClickFix is a mobile platform on your smartphone. You can download it. It connects basic service request issues to your local city government. So it creates work orders. And in 2008, it turned on in Richmond, and no one knew it, but everybody in the community was using it. Potholes, street lights that were out, traffic lights that were out, trash that was sitting in the street, or illegal dumping of like tires somewhere in the neighborhood. But what happened was no one in City Hall knew that it existed. Enter me. I was the one in City Hall who said, how do we connect this platform, SeeClickFix, to city services? So we created the call center, and by 2014, so within a matter of 6 years, Richmond went from like barely on the radar to now one of the top 5 users nationally of SeeClickFix platform, which meant that every day people were clicking on this website using the mobile app to communicate to city government. With that, they provide a lot of advice, feedback, data. It showed us on a map all the things that were going on, and you could see geographically what was happening in your city. It provided like a real good fingers on the pulse of the city. And so what happened was we created a relationship because we had to, but then at the end it became this relationship of, we need you to tell us more. Like, we valued what SeeClickFix created in the data, and they shared it with us in an open platform. But what created was new opportunities, new conversations, new value add, new reports, new analysis. But then one of the key things that happened was as they grew as a company, they had more functionality. And then it became we had to pay for SeeClickFix. And then it became, well, why are we paying for this service? They've created a value, they've forced themselves as a service for us. Now we have no choice, and now we're gonna have to pay them a couple hundred grand a year to use their platform. And this kind of approach didn't sit well with a lot of city leaders, to the point where we've now replaced it with our own software system. And it's one of those unfortunate stories because I feel like sometimes the way to be disruptive is to kind of just force your way through, which is what SeeClickFix did. And so one of the things that became out of this saga was they didn't really have a true partner in City Hall. They forced their way into the fingers of this constituency to make sure that the public wants it, then government will have to do it. But when it came down to it, it was too narrow. It wasn't flexible. It didn't integrate with our systems well enough. You couldn't take a request from a citizen's phone and create a work order for a pothole ticket in City Hall. And that connection was vitally important because otherwise, you had someone in City Hall taking one platform and translating it into a new platform. And then the citizen wondered why they didn't hear back. And the reason why they didn't hear back is because it's one person's job to go from one place to the other. To ask that same person to go back to see if that was done to put it back, it was just too much work. And so one of the key things that happened was it became too laborious, became too negative of an impact. And that was the problem we did not foresee, and got to the point where we finally just got rid of it altogether. Don't let that happen to you. And I mean that in a very, hopefully, supportive, productive way. Make sure you have an ally, a partner in city government that's going to advocate for your solution through thick and thin. And make sure that when you get to a place where a government like we have, SeeClickFix used us in conferences and for awards and all these things that they shared across the country, but they never gave us really, I don't think, enough credit for that. Not that I wanted money, but perhaps a discount, perhaps a place that you advocated through white papers and case studies and all these examples that sold your product to other cities, but you never gave us that benefit back. So keep that in mind too. If you're helping other governments with the work we've done together, then make sure that I get that benefit back in the end. All right, let's get back to some of the detailed nitty-gritty stuff. Terms and conditions. This is where I also see the specifics of a contract become really difficult to navigate. So with that, a lot of times, this is where the best contracts die. This is where the best, maybe your pilot worked, but now going from pilot to actual solution hits a roadblock. One of the key things was indemnity. And indemnity means responsibility for a problem going on. So if your product fails and doesn't work, or it doesn't work for a specific period of time, then if you don't have redundancies built in, so if you think about traffic management, which some of you might be doing, if your system were to go down, what happens to that intersection or intersections? The lights can't blink forever. And so it's up to you to be able to control how to make sure that that never happens. Or if it's electrical power outage, not your own, you're able to help offset that impact easily as they turn the lights back on. A lot of times, some of these challenges are who's responsible for what. The last thing a government wants to have is anyone else being responsible that they have to lean on to do something. So that's where indemnity comes in, where if you're controlling something for them and your system, your platform gets hacked, or maybe something goes down in one of your servers, that your service delivery back to that city is not going to stop what they need to do and ultimately create a value for the city to have to come up with, whether it be accidents, damages, or other impact negatively. Another key thing, who owns the data? A lot of the data ownership is one of the key things I still find challenging in government. And I think it's because lawyers haven't truly caught up to understanding what open data truly means. And we use it as a protection of keeping our own data in our own coffers. Here's my problem with that. It's the public's data. Most of the data we create in government is from an interaction with a business, individual, or a household, or a company as a whole. It is technically the public domain. And so unless there's something in it that is necessarily could create remember the anonymous issue from before, it creates a non-anonymity, it creates an identification of an individual, then it should be public. Let's make sure we focus on that capacity. Make sure your security standards for that data are over and above what the minimums are. Make sure you have to keep that in there too. If there's any customization needed, make sure you put that into the writing, you understand what's needed for that. Another key thing, if you can provide regular training and updates of new changes on a regular basis, whether it be by a video or a Zoom or Microsoft Teams video interaction, provide that feedback loop in your contract. It makes them feel like you're not just going to leave them in the lurch or leave them in the dark when things go bad or they need to update everything else. Another thing is make sure you understand that when your system goes through an upgrade, that they know about it, and vice versa. If they upgrade their system and it maybe creates some incompatibility with your system, that they make sure they don't have to pay again. So let's say I go from a work order system you work with from one company and I switch to another company and we've got to create a whole nother integration with this new platform. I'm not thinking about your software in my contract. I'm just thinking about improving how we operate. How do we make sure that whatever we do is going to work no matter what? Just some key obstacles that I've heard happen where a third-party company, such as a startup like you're going to become, met a roadblock where they had to go through the entire RFP process because the government changed their vendor for their internal software system. And that created a whole new need of updating everything they had to do. And it created, I think, a year's void, got rid of a whole year's worth of a contract payment, which was money that they were depending on for operations. So think ahead. Make sure you're being prepared and aware for all that you might need. And while you can say there's some things you can do through APIs and other data technology solutions that can avoid this, make sure you're aware that this could happen depending on what you're going with that. Couple slides left. We're almost finished here. It's been a really fun going back to these stories and telling you how this works from my capacity. Legal. So city attorneys aren't known for being the most creative people. Lawyers, period, aren't creative that much, but especially in the public sector, a lot of them are very protective of the charter, the rules, maybe the guidelines from the state or local level itself. And a lot of them will just, when you give them an answer or are interacting with them on a contract term, they'll just say no because they can't. And I've dealt with this every time I've successfully won an award. I've been met with, no, you can't do that. We cannot proceed. I learned really quickly. That just means that solution, that one pathway, that one option you provided didn't work. It means now you've got to try to find out how to get them to tell you, well, if that won't work, what would be a way to do this? They're not going to offer that on their own because giving legal advice to them isn't necessarily in their best interest. So you need to find a way in your conversation to ask questions. If this won't work, then what might work? How can we make this? How can we get to a place where we can work together on that? What do I need to bring back to address your concerns? These are key things that help them see how you're trying to think creatively around your solution, with what they're implementing your solution for what might be met with some legal challenges. A lot of times they won't tell you exactly why they're saying no, so you might even have to ask for more specifics. And I'm not advocating for you to, pretend like you don't know what they're saying. Ask them why. Where does it say that? Ask for the specific legal example of why this won't work. Because what might happen is they'll say, well, it can't work because this guideline and this code says this, or we have this policy, or we have this law. And you go, okay, so then if that exists, what's the way to address that concern? Because a lot of times we might want to ask is, why are you saying no? And if there might be a reason in that where you can learn something very valuable of how to do it better the next time. Lastly, know what you're willing to give up to say yes. Meaning, if you understand going in, I really want this to work, so I'm willing to say no to what's in my contract or in my pilot, these 3 things. I will not say no to these things, because it's really important to not get into a back and forth negotiation with a city attorney over your final contracts and your terms and conditions and get stuck in the nuance of where all of a sudden you're trying to decide in the moment what's important enough to keep and what's not important enough to let go. And in those differences, you'll find a lot of times a negotiation will go one way or the other. And at that point, you've invested enough time that this needs to happen. And so that's one thing too. The way the government works, we have bureaucracy for a reason, layers of services and operations and decisions and sign-offs, et cetera. Honestly, to wear people out, to see how committed they are to doing the hard work to make it done. I believe in all of you, that you all are committed to making this work. That's why you're here. And so for me, I'm just giving you advice that when you face one of these obstacles and hurdles in the potential future for your business and your startup, this is why you might be dealing with that answer, and hopefully give you some solutions about solving that problem. So forcing the issue, we kind of talked about that guerrilla style implementation. Make sure the city has the things to use your technology. Sometimes it doesn't always work that way. See Click Fix was a good one of thinking about how they put it in the public's hands that made it so that city government could not say no to it being used. They had to use it. It was already being used by thousands of residents. I can't say no to using this solution. Another one was scooters. We had bird scooters, and I think 2 years ago, descend all on cities. They're showing up on street corners and people using apps and riding around recklessly. And truth be told, what happened was there were no laws, there were no controls over where they could be parked, where they could not be parked, where they could be driven, where they could not be driven. What were the safety protocols? What happens if it causes an accident? What happens if it's damaged? All of a sudden, the legal world around scooters became a completely big mess, all because this startup went through and put all these scooters all over these cities. And once you put them in there and people liked them, it was really hard to take away. While it can be effective, we don't like bird scooters. We like Lime. We like the other ones. They like their competitors because they came to us first. But without the bird scooters coming in with create the chaos, the disruption, then the other ones wouldn't have had a chance to speak with us either. So it kind of goes both ways. Are you going to be willing to be the bird scooter and come in and just push everything out there and let people, use it and then create the legal change to make your solution work for the long term? Or are you going to wait to be second and learn from the observing of someone else and put that to work on your own? So at the end of the day, either one can be effective. Finding what works for you is to be best. I want to make sure you think about this too. Don't frustrate leadership. Don't tell people what they have to do. Don't make them feel like they're cornered and have no choice. You want to make sure you come in to bring the value. You're going to be creating either an incredible value to the organization, a really big improvement on how they operate, increasing transparency, safety, accountability, just efficiencies across the board. So make sure that that's what they see in you, not because you're the person I have to work with because of one of those previous issues I already mentioned. So just giving a little bit of that piece. All right, last couple points here. Requests for proposals, really pointless stuff. You can see the F word in there. We don't like to do RFPs, but we have to do them all the time. The process can take up to a year to complete, sometimes even longer, depending on how big it is. It's not good for your life cycle as a startup for depending on an RFP to succeed. So make sure you're prepared either to handle an RFP and are supported with the staff and resources to navigate the application process, which is really tedious, and more importantly, the pitching process to become a finalist, and then negotiating the final terms, because that all combined can be 6 to 9 to 12 months. In that time frame, you're not making money yet. So think about that. RFPs can really create a lot of those hesitancies, but sometimes they're required for you to make sure that your solution works. Some states, in Virginia we have this, we can do a 3-bid process. If you go back to the earlier slides around what's required, if you're registered with the federal government and are registered at the local government, state level, you can be one of a 3-bid process for that piece. Make sure you have a statement of work and your requirements and a already prepared contract ready to go. So make sure you get some legal assistance in defining what that can mean, because sometimes these are ways to avoid an RFP altogether. But also make sure you understand the last bullet point, which is really key. A lot of cities, states, and federal government contracts have what they call the minimum or maximum value, which means I have up to $100,000 threshold, which means above $100,000, I have to do an RFP. Meaning if you're below $100,000, I can do a 3-bid process or what we call a sole source procurement. So make sure you understand what the options are so you can avoid a really lengthy RFP to make sure that what you're doing for your solution is going to work for the long haul. Because ultimately, you need to make money at some point. You need to get paid for the work you're doing. And more importantly, that's how you're going to be successful in the end. So here's some last couple points. You can be a subscription-based service, so make sure you think about some solutions that might make you not technically a technology solution. Your software as a service. Maybe some companies do some billing by population size, so they tier you based upon your potential number of users or clients. Make sure, as I said before, know your procurement thresholds. Make sure you understand the dollar amounts of what they're able to buy up to without some of the legal requirements for RFP. Make sure you understand some of your core functionality. Another thing too, if you can maybe separate pieces of your solution into different buckets, it helps as well. And make sure you understand exactly kind of how that could work, because then all of a sudden it becomes, well, it's $50,000 for this, it's $50,000 for that, and it's $50,000 for the other piece. And they combine to create your solution, but they're 3 separate contracts below the threshold, and they're able to get your work done. And more importantly, you the resources needed to support them in the long run. Discount to earn support, but make sure you don't cheapen what you're providing. You have a valuation for what you're trying to sell. Make sure you maintain that. One of the key parts of marketing your value is your price. And so one of the key things I say is don't make me feel like I have to, discount everything you do because that's the only way I'm going to work with you. We're cheap, but we also know you got to pay for quality. So sometimes it helps as well. Lastly, know your competitors. Make sure you understand who you're going to be fighting and competing against. But make sure you also know how you can say that you're going to beat them. Be the better client, be the better product. Say that you're going to be more attentive to their needs because you are. You're going to be hungry to work with this city and these people because ultimately that's how you're going to be successful. And that, my friends, is the end of my presentation. So I look forward to answering your questions and comments now.